The trial for Chris Carbert and Anthony Olienick began today here in Lethbridge, Alberta, in the courtroom behind me. Robert Krejcik reporting for Rebel News. The charges against both Chris Carbert and Anthony Olienick stem from their participation in the Coutts blockade and protest of 2022, in which cross-border traffic linking the U.S. and Canada at the Coutts Sweetgrass border crossing was intermittently obstructed by vehicles. And the motivation for this protest was the same as what we saw at the Freedom Convoy in Ottawa, Ontario the same year. The two protests were sharing in civil disobedience and ideological objectives. Both were broadly opposed to the so-called public health mandates, edicts, decrees issued by all levels of government, ostensibly to combat COVID-19 transmission. Both Chris Carbert and Anthony Olienick pled not guilty to all the charges against them. The two men share three charges. They are charged with conspiracy to murder. The Crown is alleging that they conspired to murder police officers. They're both also being charged with unlawful possession of firearms for a purpose dangerous to the public peace. They're also both being charged with mischief-inducing damage over $5,000 for willfully obstructing lawful use of Highway 4 without color of right. Anthony Olienick has one unique charge against him that Chris Carbert does not have. He's being accused of unlawful possession of an explosive device, an incendiary device, for purpose dangerous to the public peace. Given that pretrial proceedings concluded yesterday, the trial began today. And two primary things occurred today. The jury was brought into the courtroom and it received its instructions. And also, the first witness for the Crown was invited, an RCMP officer. His name is Greg Tulloch. We've seen him before. He testified as a Crown witness in the trial of the Coutts Three, Marco van Hugenbos, Alex van Herk, and George Jansen. And Tulloch's relevance lies in his capacity as an RCMP liaison working in the 2022 Coutts protest and blockade. And he'll testify to his experiences working at that protest. Folks, not to make it about me, but I live in Ottawa. I had to come out here to Lethbridge, Alberta to do this journalism. That requires airfare, rental car, accommodation, other sorts of expenses like food and gas. We can't do this sort of journalism for free. We depend on your generous contributions to produce it. So please continue helping us out. Please visit truckertrials.com. Chris Carbert and Anthony Olienick are the two remaining defendants of the original Coutts 4, which previously included Chris Lysak and Jerry Morin. The latter two men pled guilty to lesser charges back in February and were sentenced to time served in remand. Bear in mind that both Chris Carbert and Anthony Olienick have been in custody. They're being held in Lethbridge Correctional Center. It's a prison which holds men convicted of violent crimes, including murder, aggravated assault, things like that, since February 14th, when they were arrested, of 2022. So they've been in remand for something like 850 days. In his instructions to the jury, Justice David Lebrenz, the overseeing presiding judge over this trial, cautioned the jurors against unconscious biases. He told jurors that they have a duty to set aside prejudices or biases, and he said they must not take legal instructions from others. He also said, quote, that the jurors must judge the evidence fairly, without bias, prejudice, sympathy, or partiality. In his instructions to the jury, Justice David Lebrenz, the overseeing presiding judge over this trial, repeatedly emphasized the importance of the presumption of innocence. He stated that the defendants have nothing to prove and that the burden of proof lies entirely on the Crown, on the prosecution, to prove beyond a reasonable doubt guilt on the part of the defendants. And in defining reasonable doubt, in setting the parameters of that status, Lebrenz indicated that reasonable doubt is closer to absolute certainty than it is to probability. He also defined absolute certainty as an impossible standard. Matt Dabilowicz, one of the three prosecutors working for the Crown, who also worked as one of the Crown prosecutors in the Coutts 3 trial, stated that the RCMP discovered a cache of firearms, ammunition, and body armor in possession of the defendants, and that he would provide proof of preparation indicating the conspiracy that the Crown alleges took place between the two defendants to murder police officers. While being cross-examined by Catherine Bayak, who was representing Chris Carbert, RCMP officer Greg Tulloch remarked on his assessments of the motivations of the protesters, the demonstrators at the Quds blockade of 2022. He said the protesters were concerned about, quote, government overreach, where that overreach leads to, also our country turning into a country like China and devolving into fascism. He also said that he encountered certain conspiracy theories, and he gave some specific examples. He mentioned chemtrails and space lasers. Tulloch also testified twice that he had no direct contact with either of the defendants, Chris Carbert or Anthony Olienick. The judge stated that this trial may go all the way into mid-July, but expressed optimistic expectations from the two legal teams, the prosecution and the defense teams, that it would conclude in early July. Dear Rebel News audience, not to make this about myself, but remember, I live in Ottawa, Ontario. I've got to get out here to Lethbridge, Alberta, in order to do this journalistic endeavor, and we can't do this for free. Airfare, rental car, accommodation, consumables like food and gas, and we depend on your contributions to produce this original reporting. So please help us out. Visit truckertrials.com and stay up to date with our ongoing coverage.